Hugo, do you think Starmer has risen to the challenge? Do you think the system has risen to the challenge of all of this?
Well, I think his response was very legalistic. He sounded more like the DPP again, rather than the Prime Minister, perhaps. It was a legal response and process-driven response. Look, there's a real problem out there. I'm speaking to you this morning from down in the West Country in Devon, and we've had rioting in Plymouth, which is not overly resourced for the police because we don't normally have rioting in Plymouth. So this thing is spreading around the country. I don't know. If you're going to ask me why nothing has happened in Scotland and Wales, I simply don't know. But I don't think that it's going to stop immediately in England. And I think we have to have a grown-up conversation with ourselves about why this is happening. Is it just the extreme right? And I think language is everything in this. And I think to paint all those who are protesting on one side as extreme right is missing the point. Equally, I think there needs to be parity in policing. But it's extremely concerning. And when you have countries like Iraq and Australia giving travel warnings to people about coming to the UK, not only is it extremely dangerous, it's extremely humiliating. And further, just quickly, you said that the Northern Ireland Assembly was being recalled. And I was a Minister of State in Northern Ireland. Obviously, every year we had rioting, particularly over the marching season. We should never forget that policemen and women are human beings like the rest of us. We are putting them in considerable danger each and every time. And that must be at the forefront of our thoughts as well.
You mentioned the fact that there's a difference between protest and riot here, though, Hugo, that if there's no one can be at a gathering where people are throwing masonry, attacking police, doing Nazi salutes, shouting abuse, whatever you might feel about the policy of immigration, and there's clearly very reasonable people who can have very strong views on that. You can't if you're still standing at a protest where that's going on, you're nailing your flag to that mast. You just simply are, because if you don't agree with that type of behaviour, you shouldn't be at the protest.
Well, sure, and there were some young kids I saw who were arrested who let off fireworks, and then when they arrested said, "Oh, I wasn't aiming the firework at you." Well, what were they doing there with a firework in the first place? So it's absolutely right. But it's got to be even-handed. And I think where Musk said something interesting, and I don't agree with what else he's been saying, but I did think it was interesting when he said that Starmer should say that everyone was going to be defended, not just specific mosques or synagogues, whatever. Everybody is entitled to be protected by the law. And let's not forget the Jewish community had an extraordinarily difficult time not long ago over protests against them, against synagogues and so forth. So the police have to be even-handed, and the public have to see that the police are being even-handed.
And that includes in Birmingham, where there was some violence involving Muslim men as well. I think that's a point that people have been making. Kezia, why is this not happening in Scotland? We thought, when we had a conversation at 4 o'clock this morning, Asma and I, we thought Kezia might have an idea about why this hasn't spread to Scotland. Do you?
I do, yeah, and it's not just my own opinion. I've been speaking to a few different people across the political spectrum about their respective views on this. Look, just because it hasn't happened in Scotland doesn't mean that it couldn't. And it doesn't need to happen on the streets of Glasgow or Dundee for Muslim men and women to feel less safe this week than they did last week. And that, I find this desperately sad and deeply worrying. And I know people in my own life and in my own community who are fearful for what they see on their TV screens. And it doesn't matter whether it's 3 streets away or 3 countries or 400 miles away. It affects everybody in the country, and we need a countrywide response to it. That's why yesterday Scotland's First Minister John Swinney went to Edinburgh Central Mosque and spoke to the imam there and asked them if the community had everything they needed to ask them how they felt. There's every chance it could happen in Scotland. And the thing I can't bear is little hints, and you see it here and there, of rising Scottish exceptionalism, that this is somehow an English problem or something that's associated with Englishness. This is brutal racist violence and nothing more than that.
And but why hasn't it happened then in Scotland? I mean, that's an interesting point there. And there clearly are people who be racist in Scotland. Scotland has its history of sectarian violence. We all know that. You've seen it in Northern Ireland, interestingly. There has been violence in Northern Ireland. There were problems in the Republic of Ireland. Before all of this, there were violent riots about immigration in Dublin that led to people being killed. So that's the Republic of Ireland, which is quite a progressive, left-leaning country in the same way that Scotland is. And Why hasn't it got to Scotland so far?
Well, if you accept that all of this violence and activity is being organised by ringleaders on social media, then, and they're moving from town to town, then it's their plan that determines whether or not it comes to Scotland, and whether or not you see the same pattern we've seen in so many other English cities, where you have overt professional racists arriving. They're then joined by boozed up and drugged up hooligans, and then they're joined up by kids with nowhere else to go. That toxic mix that we're seeing in England could easily happen in Scotland, and I've seen Tommy Robinson say he's going to come to Glasgow. And I tell you something, the vast majority of people in Glasgow will reject that, will rally against that. There's a history of that in Glasgow, if you remember back to what happened with the police in the Kenmure Street response to asylum seekers being removed from their homes. There's a huge anti-racism movement in Glasgow that will rally against that. But that doesn't mean it's immune to pockets of violence in the same way that Manchester or Liverpool, that have, again, such strong histories of rallying against fascism and racism, have shown in the past.
We're going to move on and talk a bit about disinformation now, because Starmer v Musk, it's not really the heavyweight bout that we thought was on the cards, but it's become an unpredictable first month in government for Labour in a few ways. The Times and the Mail are leading on the Prime Minister's row with the ex-owner over Musk's claim that Britain faces civil war and that two-tier policing is a reality. But the closest that Keir Starmer has come to actually calling out, slapping down, calmly dismantling Elon Musk is via an unnamed spokesperson who briefed the lobby yesterday. So we asked the Courts Minister, Heidi Alexander. Here's what she told us.
I do think these comments are unjustifiable. If you've got a platform, a large social media platform, then you've also got a responsibility. I think it is deeply irresponsible. I think everyone should be appealing for calm. Use of language such as a civil war is in no way acceptable. We're seeing police officers being seriously injured, buildings set alight, and so I really do think that, you know, everyone who has a platform should be exercising their power responsibly.
Hugo, I'm not sure what you think about the kind of importance, the influence of X or Twitter is, because obviously not everyone's on it. It's not kind of real life. It's populated by journalists, and increasingly it feels kind of conspiracy theorists. Should Elon Musk be taking on the Prime Minister of this country and saying things like, well, what about everyone else? You know, kind of all lives mattering, everything. And also saying things like civil war is inevitable. Is that helpful?
Well, I don't think civil war is inevitable. I think if there's to be a civil war, he probably needs to look in his own backyard in the United States. Look, I said at the beginning, this is a very, very difficult situation whereby everybody needs to mind their language and moderate what they're saying, whatever they may feel. Otherwise, they will just exacerbate the situation. But actually, you know, at the end of the day, this is all happening in large part because of social media. And the fact is that Kezia said it might spread to Glasgow or Edinburgh. This will be because of social media. This will be because people are posting things which aren't accurate, which are misleading, which are designed to whip up anxiety. And that's why we've had it in Plymouth. I'm convinced of it, because people are reading this stuff online. So the bigger question is, you know, are we under-regulated, as it were? Do we need more regulation online? That's a very, very tricky path to go down in order to prevent this sort of thing happening. And then you've got to balance that against free speech. But I think, you know...
But Elon Musk, that takes a long time. I mean, it feels like we've been talking about this for a couple of years already.
My best advice to Mr. Musk on this occasion would be, you know, butt out.
Kezia, I presume you have the same feelings towards Elon Musk, or am I wrong?
Yeah, and I'm really glad that the Prime Minister isn't responding to what's essentially Twitter bait for, you know, a commercial platform. And I agree with Hugo to the extent that there's nothing we can do to fix this quickly when it comes to social media. We've often talked on this programme about the need to better regulate social media. That horse is long since bolted, and Twitter's given up, or X has given up trying to self-regulate. Anybody who's ever tried to report racist or homophobic or sexist language on Twitter will have had an experience recently where people just shrug their shoulders and go, nah, nothing to see here. I think there's a bigger individual and collective responsibility for us, rather than expecting politicians to regulate social media or for Elon Musk to change his ways. I think we all have to ask ourselves now, is this a platform that we really want to be on? And if we're staying on it, are we complicit with it? that's a conversation I'm thinking pretty hard about with myself, and in my professional life, I know a lot of my colleagues are now thinking, do we need to just get off this? And if everybody leaves it because of what it's become, then maybe that's how we kill it.
That's very interesting. I mean, there's a couple of other things to discuss, but something like that. You need to have an alternative platform, really, don't you? And you have, I mean, I just don't know. Because journalists, sadly, are addicted to Twitter. So I don't know how likely that is, but I mean, it could be that because of everything that is going on with Elon Musk. Fueling the fire really by saying civil war is inevitable. I mean, I don't think that's in many people's minds at all. But if you say that to your millions of followers, then, again, people start to believe it.
100%. Yes, that's why I think there is something really powerful about civic organisations, universities, campaigning groups, politicians, government departments going, right, what actually is the difference between Twitter and LinkedIn when it comes to the audience that we want to reach? Like, we're all on Twitter to find the news and to find what other people think. Well, if we all, pack our bags and move to a different platform, then what we leave behind is a medium that is just full of reactionary, racist, misogynists and homophobes. And maybe that's how it ends.
Hugo, I want to talk to you just very briefly about disinformation, because all of this really can be traced back to an incredibly tragic event a week ago. These 3 girls who died, there was an online who were killed. There was an online rumour that was false about an individual. Obviously, someone has been charged now. We can't really talk about it. But this is still happening, actually. I don't know if you read in the Times today about police in Suffolk who have had to call out as untrue a video that Tommy Robinson posted. I think it was from his holiday in Cyprus, saying that a woman who had been killed out walking her dog in Suffolk and Ipswich, I think it was, though she'd been killed by 2 Somali migrants. And the police have had to come out, and they wouldn't normally do that, and say, that's not true. But the problem is that that's already spread, and people will now believe that. There's no way of making them disbelieve something.
Well, they always say that if you put a fact into somebody's brain, it takes something like 3 or 4 times the brain capacity to delete that fact if it's inaccurate. And as you say, once it's there, it's there. Look, these rumours have been going around. Do you remember there were rumours about the BB Stockholm, which turned out to be untrue, I believe. So no, we live in a different world now. But I would just say this: even if you were to regulate Facebook or regulate X, as it's now called, you've still got the media. And watching the news last night and seeing rioting elsewhere, people watch the news at home, and that in turn can encourage people to then join riots elsewhere. What are you going to do? Are you going to regulate the news? You're then in extremely difficult territory, I think. But I do think in terms of Mr. Robinson or Mr. Lennon or whatever he's called, I mean, I think when he returns from his family holiday in Cyprus, he's going to have some very serious questions to answer. But it won't be me asking them. I'm sure there'll be others much more interested in asking him what his involvement has been. And as Sir Keir has said, the full force of the law will then apply with an appropriate legal response, to quote him.
The point is that the news is regulated. It's regulated very tightly in respect of what you can and can't say. And social media is effectively unregulated. And the point is that you're so right, Hugo. I don't know the answer to this because these companies, and Facebook is as bad as Twitter. It's just that it's less visible, I think, in lots of respects now, Facebook. But it's still, I suspect, an awful lot of these people on these riots are going there from Facebook. And the point is, they are publishers, these companies, that want none of the responsibility of publishers, but want all the profits for being a publisher. And I don't know the answer, because Kezia said we could all come off X, but that would actually, not enough people would ever do that. And that would leave it, as Kezia says, to a whole bunch of other people, which would make it worse, because it would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. This feels like a kind of fundamentally unsolvable problem. And we had Heidi Alexander on, and she said this is the new frontier of crime, social media, and they don't have all the answers. But that's kind of depressing, isn't it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think, you need to temper that with the fact that social media, when used properly, gives a lot of people a lot of pleasure and a lot of access, and people connect with friends and family around the world. And this is an international phenomenon. It's not just local, like a lot of newspapers are. So when used properly and to good effect, social media is a positive tool. It's not something I do too much. like everyone, I've been subject to campaigns and so forth on social media. And I think it's the anonymity, which is one of the problems, that people put things on social media which they simply wouldn't do in real life. But, regulating social media, regulating X, then doesn't another organization then crop up in its place and you're back to square one again?
And also,
it is a huge issue.
They'll probably just laugh at you because they're more powerful than you, because they're big, giant American companies that make billions and billions of pounds of profit, like Facebook. Exactly right. Emily says Twitter X is already a very small platform, but punches above its weight because it's where the journalists and politicians are. Closed and private Facebook groups will most likely be showing the exact same content, but unseen to journalists. The biggest issue here is that platforms are not publishers and cannot start behaving like them, or they risk being sued. And that's exactly right. They don't want the liability.